You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is brought to you by the publishers of Renew Economy, Australia's best informed, most read website focusing on the green energy transition, and is supported by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Hello and welcome back to the Switched On Australia podcast. I'm Anne Delaney, coming to you from Arakwal country. Thanks for joining me. Now imagine stepping into a market where prices aren't just high, they're deliberately confusing, where loyalty can cost you and shopping around isn't just recommended, it's expected. Yet comparing offers is nearly impossible. Well, welcome to Australia's retail electricity market. If you've ever wondered why electricity plans are so hard to navigate or whether the system is designed that way on purpose, today's interview is for you. Since the start of the new financial year, electricity prices in New South Wales, South Australia and southeast Queensland have all risen. The default market offer, which is supposed to be the maximum price retailers can charge residential and small business customers, has jumped. And some retailers have used this as an excuse to hike prices on their market offers, which are supposed to be more competitive. My guest today brings an economist's perspective to this market that's dominated by a handful of powerful players, oligopolists who shape prices, limit competition and thrive on consumer inertia. He'll explain why our electricity bills are often higher than they should be, why shopping around is harder than it needs to be, and what really happens when government regulation tries to level the playing field. But also how we could redesign the market so the electricity companies are forced to come to us with the best deals rather than making us try and search for them. And we'll hear about a fascinating undercover study that hired professional actors to haggle with electricity retailers, revealing the hidden cost of not negotiating. Professor David Byrne is the Ritchie Chair of Economic Research at the University of Melbourne and a member of the Australian Competition Tribunal. And I started my conversation with David by asking him why electricity prices just keep going up.
I can think of two kind of economic forces going on here. And what's underneath everything I'll talk about is simply the fact that in the retail electricity market, we have some dominant players. There's some big dominant oligopolists, they're often called. And when you have big companies in a market like this, it's concentrated, they have what we call monopoly power or market power, which means they have the ability to dictate prices. They can kind of set prices and steer the market one way or the other. So that's kind of underneath everything here. Now, let's think of a world where we don't have a default offer. Let's suppose the companies can set anything they want for standing offers and sort of market offers, as they call it. And those are the offers that you might negotiate if you shop around. So there's kind of a simple way to think of it is you got a high price standing offer and a low price market offer. And the companies all set these things. In a world where you don't have like a default contract saying what the standing offer should be or it's going to be, if the companies are free to set high prices and low prices, well, what that allows them to do is do something called price discriminate. So you might think, let's set high prices for standing offers and we'll make money off people that don't take advantage, that don't shop around. If they just stick on it, right, we can raise that. And basically, if we can do that and we're trying to make a profit margin with our low price, we can then go compete for the people that are shopping around. So if we think that kind of a model of the world is some people shop around and others don't, then we can kind of make a profit by charging high prices to the ones who don't shop around and low prices to the ones who do shop around. And you kind of get in that world, you get higher standing offers and lower market offers. Now, let's suppose the government comes in and says, right, we don't like these large standing offers. Companies say, okay, you're going to set it for us. Sure. And suppose they squeeze down the standard offer, they bring the standing offers, they bring them down. The companies say, well, you've just taken away a way that we used to make money, basically. Like we can't take advantage of people as much as we used to for not shopping around. But let's be clear, nothing I'm saying here is per se anti-competitive. This is just capitalism. This is just how markets work. If you don't pay attention. If you book an airline ticket the day before, you're going to pay higher than if you shop years in advance, months in advance. So it's the same sort of forces at work here. So the government comes in, brings in down those standing offers. As a company, I'm saying, okay, I just lost one way that we make money with the higher standard offers. That's been brought down. Well, what we can do then, if to recover profit, is we can raise the market offers. So we're not going to compete as aggressively as we used to with those market offers. We're going to bring those low prices up toward the standing offers to sort of balance our profits. So there's a sense in which when a government comes in and says you can't set a price too high, companies will adjust their price discrimination strategies. And one thing we often see is when you see regulation of the high prices, which is what attracts all the public attention and the government's attention, then the companies reallocate and you get this kind of squishing or closing of the gap between the high and the low prices. So there's a sense in which the something like regulating a standard offer or bringing in this default offer, it is protecting everybody who was not shopping around and maybe giving them a better deal. But what's interesting, there's sort of spillovers that the people that were shopping around aren't getting the deals they used to get. And so that's one way to think about how the companies might be reacting here in terms of shifting around how they price discriminate in the market between the standing offers and the market offers, or the high and the low offers. Um, the last thing I'll say, you might then be wondering, wait a minute, well, how is it? Well, if they're competing like competition, maybe that shouldn't that just keep the market offers down, right? Should like how is it they can just raise them? Because if I'm Energy Australia and I raise my market offer, maybe Origin's thinking, sweet, I can undercut and take some business. Well, it turns out when governments, in lots of academic studies sort of show this, when governments come in and sort of start setting price ceilings and regulating points, they shine a big bright light on a particular price in the market. And when you have these oligopolists and they have a target that they might think about kind of reaching or going toward, it just seems like gravity, basically, that these companies are able to collectively move prices toward these, what we might call focal prices or focal points in markets when they're introduced, particularly through government intervention.
There's heaps in what you've just said,
I,
David.
yeah, yeah,
But one of the things I want to focus right in on is that whole issue of being advised, being told by government, by industry, well, if you don't like it, shop around.
yeah,
But we are not shopping around. I mean,
yeah.
surveys suggest that 80% of us could be on a better electricity plan, but we don't shop around. And we don't shop around because it's too damn complicated. What does your research suggest on maybe you can flesh that out on what your research is suggesting on why the consumers are not doing that and whether industry is making it difficult for customers?
Yeah. So electricity is one of these products that really hits the hip pocket for everybody. It's an essential service. Um, we deregulated the market in 2009-10 with the idea that competition would really bring prices down and bring all kinds of innovation in. And we're not seeing it at the rate we would hope to have seen it. And one reason for that is that electricity, as you said, and is complicated in terms of how to like do the math and compare given my electricity usage profile day to day, what it means with a nonlinear contract. Like your head explodes when you hear these things. You're busy. Like people have a whole lot going on in their life. And it's not that different from going to the gym. Like I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes. I'll do it tomorrow. And you just keep kicking the can down the road. And I think the other thing with electricity that's kind of makes us very sticky as consumers and not switching and shopping around is it's really a passive form of consumption. Like I suspect for many people listening, the lights are on right now in their homes or they're being heated maybe by electricity. And you don't really think about the number ticking up. Like you don't think about till you get your bill. At the point of time of consumption, it just sits in the background. And every 3 months or every month or whenever you get a bill saying it. Let me contrast that with something else I do a lot of research on as far as a market, fuel. Think about petrol. When you go to the petrol station and you go to the Bowser and you put the pump in and you start squeezing that nozzle, what are you looking at when you do that? you're looking at your money being drained away. You're looking at the money being spent at the time in which you're filling up, right? And some very salient. So electricity is the exact opposite of that. Another difference between electricity and petrol, which kind of shines a light on why we're so sticky with electricity and not attentive. With petrol, you drive around and eventually your tank runs out. So you can't drive anymore. So you're forced to constantly, the majority of Australians do this once every week to 2 weeks. You go to the Bowser and fill up. So you're forced to go look at it repeatedly. And so in petrol, we are unbelievably sensitive to petrol prices. And it's because of the salience of the cost. We look at it when we're filling up, and we're forced to engage with that every week. You contrast that with electricity, it just ticks up in the background. You don't see it go up, and you get a bill every, what'd you say, month or 3 months. And so those are those features that make us really, really, really inertial or really sticky as customers. And it's true that if you look in the data, the vast majority of Australians have never searched or switched for a plan ever. It's too complicated. We're too busy.
Do you think that's going to change with more smart apps that actually register and give you the information about how much electricity you're using and on what appliances, and obviously the rollout of the smart meters?
Okay, this might take up the rest of the podcast. I will stay on prices, and this will be something that me and many colleagues that do research in energy and retail electricity markets are frustrated and get stuck on. So it is true that we have apps and we have things like Vic Energy Compare and Energy Made Easy, which are large platforms in Australia that allow you to upload, if you want, your smart meter data. It will do all the math for you and tell you your best plan. And then you have to do that every year, every time one rule of thumb would be every 6 months, you should be doing that when they update their rates because of reflecting, updates to their costs. So at a minimum, that's what you should do. Most people don't. They get too busy, they procrastinate, and they don't. But when we think about smart meters and when we think about time of use with pricing and we think about dynamic pricing, one thing smart meters was supposed to do was it was supposed to allow the companies to set all kinds of prices potentially throughout the day. In fact, your electricity price every day could change every 5-30 minutes if you wanted to reflect underlying wholesale market conditions. And you think about the penetration of solar power as an example in Australia. What's solar? It's clean, and there's everything about the energy transition, but let's just put that all aside. Let's just think about saving money. We know we have a complete, like, oversupply. In fact, we have, negative whole prices showing up in the market. We've had feed-in tariffs drop like crazy for solar. Why? Is we have so much of it. What does that tell you about midday? Midday with solar, that stuff's cheap. Why is it we don't have, and they're starting to bubble up, but why, what's it going to take for us to start having electricity pricing plans that change drastically through the day, such that I could say to you, Anne, if you use your power midday or overnight, it's zero. And if you use it in the evenings, it's going to cost you more. But you can compete and offer much lower bills through dynamic pricing. So we have, this dynamic pricing that potentially could be out there. Now, why don't people do it? Well, people are risk averse to it. First of all, they don't want to get penalized if they don't pay attention to the bill, the prices moving all around. So you could do much better in terms of maybe a lower price. It's better for the grid as well if we could price reflecting real time cost of electricity, and if people could adjust. What do we have coming online for consumers? You look at Alexa, you look at Google Nest, you look at smart thermostats, like it's called Ecobee as an example, where you can imagine a world where you have a home that has a thermostat or a system, an AI system. It's like a robotic version of you, a robot you, where here's your home. Your home takes in your house. Think of your house as a computer, or you have something in your home like a Google, like an Alexa or a Nest in your home that takes, what does it take as data feeds? Takes your smart meter data. It has all the electricity usage at all your appliances. It's also monitoring the real-time price of electricity. And when things are cheap, it uses power. And when things are expensive, it's a smart home. It's using AI to sort of gear back, turn off your heating and cooling. You can even cycle your fridge. It's changing when you charge your EV in such a way that even under dynamic pricing, and I'm going to get to the frustration in a second, even under dynamic pricing, with these automated technologies that are coming and that are already in many parts of the world, you can save money, right? And you don't have to pay attention as a consumer. You have an AI robot at home. It's you. You know, you're at work and it's like you have an AI in your house acting as if it's you and acting as if you're at the petrol station. The AI is actually monitoring the price in real time, finding ways to save you money. And in an electrified grid with solar, you are simultaneously making it cleaner. But putting that aside, just saving on money alone, we can get there. Now, here's the chicken and egg of the problem, and we're stuck, I think, currently with this. And this question what's going to crack this problem. The problem is this. That automation sounds like a really cool thing. If prices are moving all around, automation can figure out ways to allocate our energy usage to cheap times of the day and save us money. But that's only true if we have dynamic pricing, which we do not have. So automation needs dynamic pricing. And let's think about dynamic pricing. I said to you, with dynamic pricing, things are fluctuating, things are complicated, but things could be cheaper. And only if we have automation would it be possible to enable dynamic pricing. So automation needs dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing for most people needs automation. But if you don't have one or the other one doesn't exist. So we're in this world with flat rate static pricing or very little dynamic pricing and a world without any automation. And if we want to move to that cheaper, more efficient world I just described to you that takes less effort and saves you money, we need to crack this chicken and egg problem of getting from static, non-automated demand to dynamic pricing and automation. That's where we're at.
Yes, but and I totally understand what you're saying. The problem is for Australian consumers is that it's not only the tariffs that are actually going up, even though we are getting more and more renewables into the grid, it's the network charges that are going up, and we can't do anything about those network charges because no matter how much we consume or don't consume and how much we watch our apps and see the prices and what they are, we get slugged with the network charges. The way the system is built is there's not an incentive, surely, and not enough of an incentive at the moment for us to actually, embark on some of these changes and technologies that are possible.
Yeah, so I think with, the network charges and the infrastructure charges, I think that's a separate beast from the variable rates that we pay and the amount we use. So I'm talking strictly to, let's call it the per unit cost of electricity and where we could save on that. I have colleagues that are in a situation where they have, and these are affluent people with solar and batteries who now only pay the network charges and they don't pay anything for the variable rates. So their bills have gone from thousands of dollars to 90. They pay $1 a day for power now because they don't pay variable rates. So when it comes to the larger transition and how we transition to renewable energy production and retire coal and other major power producers, like that is a separate issue of how do we keep paying the network charges, because we have to pay these because the governments are entering contracts with large energy providers up front to make the investments. Like it's the nature of the beast that we're paying for the investments and the promises that we made in the past. That we're going to have to sort of slowly scale back. I think on network charges, the bigger risk, it's not so much that we have to pay them and we're going to be on those. The bigger issue with this is whether or not you get things like people disconnecting from the grid. How do we think about that? And now they don't have a network charge. They're totally self-sufficient. But the problem is it's going to be rich people that do that first. That's going to leave less people on the hook, i.e. less rich people on the hook to pick up the bill for the network charges. And then that causes the next set of rich people to leave the grid, and then even the poor people pick it even up even more. So you get these what we call solar death spirals. I think managing that, I think experts are looking at that and saying, look, we need to prevent this. We all probably have to pay our share, whether we're disconnected or not, and we should probably make that progressive so that we don't have disadvantaged people paying network charges in the long run. But I think in the shorter run or the more immediate run, where we think about the high electricity prices we pay, the markups on those charges, and the markups that we get, the price cost markups by the oligopolists on the retail rates that we pay, the per unit charge, which is a large part of the bill, a larger part of the bill than the network charges. That's something we can do if we can crack the chicken and egg problem of dynamic pricing and automation. And we're in this in Victoria, at least we're in the state that can do it. We had the mass smart meter rollout. There's nowhere better technologically suited in the world to do this. Yet we're still stuck in stasis in, Windows 1995 type pricing. It feels like sometimes.
Yes. Can I just go back to the whole issue of shopping around? Because it
Sure.
really is a significant issue. Do you think that electricity retailers deliberately make their pricing and plans hard to understand to make it difficult to shop around?
They have an incentive to do that, and we call that obfuscation, basically. So make it harder to compare, make people feel like, oh, it's too complicated anyway. I'm out. They have these nonlinear contracts. They have contracts that say there's a network charge and a per unit charge. That's again the nature of having to pay for the infrastructure on the grid and the cost of providing the power at any point in time. Those are already really complicated, but that's not something the companies are like intentionally doing. That's just this is how energy needs to be paid for. So that's confusing on its own, but that's not, the companies are just working within what's natural for them to have to do. And I think the other thing that comes up quite often with what the companies would tell you and what you see online, and we see this in the data that we work with, is the companies do face a ton of regulatory oversight and red tape around all the rules and all the paperwork and all the provisos that need to show up in all of the contracts that they provide us and all of the deals they have to offer online. They have to recode a different contract if, this contract's exactly the same as the other one. One gives you a Woolies discount, the other gives you a Hoyt's discount. They show up as different contracts. People look at all this and say there's a bajillion contracts, but I think part of it is simply that the rules and regulations that they work within force them to do this. So it ends up looking really confusing. If even if the I think if the companies were trying to intentionally be confusing, there's a sense in which they don't have to make any additional efforts because I think the nature of the pricing itself is already confusing. I think they sit in regulatory environments where they naturally have this blowout of plans that looks confusing. They don't have to it's already confusing by itself. So I don't know how much they do above and beyond some of those issues and whether or not they are intentionally obfuscating, making things confusing. One thing they do though is, we've had research that shows this. They do something called they post prices online. You can see all those, but they will also negotiate with you. So if you call up and start haggling with a retailer and you say, look, I got this deal, I want a better deal. What can you do? I'm calling around. There's a sense in which they're making you go through more effort there and making it more difficult in terms of finding a deal because they're forcing you. It's not enough just to compare them online and switch. You actually have to go through the effort of calling and actively negotiating and pitting them against each other, which puts, the burden on the consumer. So they have those, but none of
Yeah.
that's illegal. That's completely fine. It's okay to negotiate in a marketplace. They're just making it hard for you to do that. It's a policy question of whether or not we're setting up the markets to make things easy for people or setting them up to have these more difficult pricing structures to deal with.
Yes, and before we go on to what the government should be doing about it, tell me about a very interesting study that you conducted, which looked at how retailers set prices and how customers can
Yeah.
negotiate better deals. Tell me what that study set out to do and what you found.
So basically, we had discussions in industry where there was this is around 2016, 17, where they were talking about, there's negotiation in these prices. We would look at online prices. People would tell us, yeah, but there's these prices people actually pay are different than what get posted online. And so we wanted to look into what that all meant. And so we wanted to get at negotiated prices. So what we did is we basically built a call center here at the University of Melbourne in our Department of Economics. And by that, I mean, we interviewed professional actors and we hired, I think it was about 20 of them. And they were going to be actors working off of bargaining scripts that we had provided them, calling up all the electricity retailers and negotiating over rates. And so it was a mix, it was a 50-50 mix of gender, at the time, just male and female in this case. They would call up and say, look, I'm this type of person. You'd either call them and say, I just moved to Melbourne, or I live in Melbourne and I'm looking around. So you'd have somebody just moving into their home or somebody thinking about switching around. And they'd say, they'd call these companies, say, what's the best price you can offer me? And one thing we found in the data was right off the top, if somebody had just moved to Melbourne versus were saying, I'm looking around, the person that just moved here was already getting offered a higher price, like a worse price initially, versus the person that's actually living here looking around and might be more informed. So we would see the discrimination on the phone calls right away. And then the customers would say, you would start revealing things like one type of customer would say, well, I've looked around and they'd say, I know this like kind of average price. And then this other customer call around, say, I called around and they knew the really low prices. And they'd say, what can you do? Again, you'd get 4 or 5% discounts if you were way more informed than less informed based on, the low prices or the average prices. And so that was a way for us to unpack where negotiation is in the market, because you're not going to get data on that from anybody. And to show quantitatively, it was showing up as 4 or 5% bill discounts. It's not a small number for people paying thousands of dollars in electricity bills every year. So, and if you don't do this, you pay that as what we might call the loyalty tax if you're not aggressively pitting them against each other. So, yeah, that's kind of what we found and how we went about it. The problem is, in any market where you have private negotiation and we're trying to think about market power and what to do about it as a government, you just don't have visibility into what people actually do and have to pay in the markets. And so that's kind of what we dug into in that study.
And so, were you surprised by how much prices can vary?
Not really, to be honest. There's a large kind of incentive for them to try to fight and maintain market share, especially the smaller companies, because they tend to compete for more price sensitive consumers. And you know, you look at the Thwaites review and other kind of government studies, to the best that they could estimate markups, the companies were reported to be making 9-10% profit margins. So they have some buffer to give up, 3-4% of that to try to attract a customer. So we knew they had some headroom to offer you a deal. Now, they're only offering that deal, right? That's the average markup. They're only offering you that deal if you go through all the effort we went to. So, I wasn't overly surprised, having a sense that they do price discriminate against people that are switched on and switched. Sorry, I know it's the podcast, but switched on and switched off in the market. The discounts we were seeing weren't that different from other examples of discounting and negotiation from other markets, sort of like, for example, superannuation, mortgages, and other kind of markets like that.
Are you confident, though, that the majority of electricity consumers are able to haggle with their electricity company in this way to get a better deal?
Oh, not at all. No, it's really hard. You got to remember, we're literally PhD economists designing the bargaining scripts. This is the best case scenario for trying to understand haggling. We're training these students on how to do it, having years of research. So I don't think most people would even know that you can do that, and I
Right.
think a lot of folks would be uncomfortable doing it.
Mm.
And so it's weird to think of your electricity market in Australia potentially being not that different from an open air market in a tourist destination where you're maybe negotiating with a vendor, and you can see people are very uncomfortable even in that setting, right? So I wouldn't think people do that. And if you look at the data and the work we've done, we've looked at other data sets with Energy Consumers Australia, and their consumer sentiment surveys, you will start to find there majorities of Australians have never even looked, not online, not phoning around. And what's interesting and really challenging seeing in that data, it's the people who don't look the most are the low income folks in Australia. It's the socioeconomically disadvantaged. When we deregulated retail electricity and thought competition would come in, one thought was that maybe there'll be price discrimination. Maybe the companies will take advantage of people through different tactics like negotiating and price posting in a way that high income folks might end up paying more and getting discriminated against because the value of the dollar is not really worth it to them. And but low income folks will be able to find deals, right? Through all this competition. It'll be great. It'll be progressive. And the evidence we have on this from the data from this really great the energy consumer sentiment survey is very useful for many researchers in the community, including us. It's a great resource. And so we saw there that you got this like it's an inverse U. So if everybody could just think of like a little hump on their yard and the data looks like a hump. And at one end of the hump are rich people, none of them look. And at the other end, under the hump on the other side, this is the amount of the poorer people, none of them look. The hump, the middle, the peak, the people that look are kind of people that are middle income. Low income folks search and look around even less than the rich folks in that data. And why might that be? And what did everybody miss? There's been a lot of research that's come out, in the time since we deregulated, not just in electricity, but in general, that disadvantaged groups in society face a lot of challenges with what we might call bandwidth, which is simply the time and energy to tackle many problems that they face in their day to day. And if you think about, I'm not sure negotiating their retail electricity contract and going through all that effort ever really makes it to the top of the list for the challenges that they face. They just don't have the time and scope to do it. It's not that they don't know. It's not that they don't want to do it. It's just really bandwidth, energy, time that creates these sort of cycles of poverty and low income. And so this is an example where you have it playing out in the retail electricity market because searching and looking around is hard and it just doesn't make it to the top of the pile for the more disadvantaged groups in society. And the implication of that is they're paying higher prices potentially.
Surely, though, the retailers know this, David. I mean, I don't think, is it too far a bow to stretch to say that they're unfairly targeting low income people?
I don't think they're targeting. I think they're just trying. Look, the companies. And let me just add on the low income people, then I'll answer your question. We have low income subsidies in electricity markets to try to offset and compensate, right? These essential costs for disadvantaged groups. What I'm telling you is that the way in which the companies set prices is as if they eat up some of that subsidy by basically making it hard for them to shop around, and they don't engage as much, at least in the data from Energy Consumers Australia, as sort of middle income folks. As far as targeting, I don't think we looked in our example in our negotiation study. One of the things we cited when we called up, another dimension was where the person lived. And we had the actors sometimes saying they're in a rich place and sometimes they're from a poor place. And so what we wanted to see was separate from the individual's circumstance moving to Melbourne or not, or whether they were informed about prices or not, was there explicit targeting of income status above and beyond that. And we found zero evidence of this. But it doesn't mean that there isn't the effect of sort of discrimination in the sense that if lower income folks are not the ones negotiating, they're going to do worse in the market, right? So, and that's exactly what you sort of see in that as far as their activities from those surveys from Energy Consumers Australia. So, I wouldn't say they're actively targeting. My inclination here is they're just trying to make the most money they can, subject to the rules of the game. That's what happens in capitalistic, oligopolistic markets. And a byproduct of that seems to be that they get unengaged low income folks, and a byproduct of that is they're going to pay more. If they paid attention, separate from their income, if they were paying attention and were switching and shopping, they would do just as well as anybody else, irrespective of their income.
So, can we do this differently? What about if retailers were required to, say, automatically move people to the best deal available? Can we do that? Would it change things?
Yeah, so that gets me, I think, into, and you're bringing me to like interesting over the horizon type questions about how do we think about market design? How do we design the market? And this is the message from Professor Taylor at the University of Chicago, won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. The key message here is about Dick Taylor is about making it easy for people. So let's talk about make it easy for people in terms of market design and what the government does. What the government seems to currently do in navigating these markets is they really focus on the companies, right? They set these default protective rates. Like they do things I think they feel they have control over in terms of setting a default, a highest maximum price for a tariff for standard offers. They focus their energy there. But it still doesn't solve, I think, what's the fundamental problem in the market. The fundamental problem of the market, the reason why those prices get higher, the reason why there's all these different prices moving around is people don't engage, right? They're not fixing the problem of lack of consumer engagement. And they've set up a market where anybody, all these companies can set all these different prices and it's confusing. There's many of them, and that's the fundamental barrier. People don't pay attention and shop around. You get less competitive outcomes. That's kind of a, econ 101. Now, let me paint a world that you could imagine having here. Imagine a world where I said, look, and you don't like being in the retail electricity market. It's confusing. But you want a competitive rate. You just want something else to do it for you. What if I say, okay, on your phone, this is like ordering an Uber. On your phone, there's a button. That button says, opt me out of this market. I don't want in. I'm out. And when you touch that button, what that does is it activates, let's say, an algorithm that uses the data. So I'm assuming a lot here in terms of the technological back end. But the technological back end I'm describing here in terms of data and switching is from like Silicon Valley. If we're thinking of government should be performing like private companies, this is at some level very achievable. So you hit that button and that does the following. It says, all right, and you are always going to pay a price or a contract of the winner of an auction that gets run, I don't know, say every month or a few months amongst the retail electricity providers. You're just always going to be on the lowest price of that auction. So it's like every few months, we're going to treat these companies the same way we treat home buyers. We're going to have them on the front lawn. They're going to bid. The lowest bidder is going to get your service, and you're just going to happily live your life, right? You're just going to keep the lights on and do whatever you need to do, and you're just going to get a bill from one of them, and that bill will correspond to the lowest price that they can competitively offer you. And if in the next few months somebody else can come in better, they've innovated, they've done some, cost restructuring so they can undercut the rivals, they'll be your supplier. It's just it's electrons, and you're going to be on some kind of contract. So let's pretend you're in that world. And so what I'm describing to you is a world where we're using market design. We're using auctions to set your prices. We're not using a world where they set a bajillion prices out on the in the market, and you go suss that out. You go figure it out, and you go look at all those hundreds of contracts and figure out your best one. This is the opposite. This is companies just come to me with your best deal, and the best player win, and they'll get your serve. They'll bid down. It takes all that effort, all the effort you have to make to compare right now, given the current market design, with what I'm describing is saying redesign the market to get you the outcome you want and avoid having you make all that effort and pay attention to it, right? And so I'm not suggesting people couldn't still shop in that world. Maybe some people don't touch the button. Maybe some people want to look around. That's fine. They can try to get a deal as well. But for those of us that don't want to pay attention but want to get competitive prices, design the market to deliver competitive prices in a kind of an algorithmic way that happens in the background, so I don't have to exert all this effort to try to find them.
Make the algorithms work for the consumers. How far off are we from a market redesign like that, though, David, in terms of technology and regulation?
I don't think we're far off if we have I think technologically we're already there. Regulation, what governments are willing to do, I'm not so sure. But let me just say this, in the early 2000s, when Google hired Hal Varian to be their chief economist, when Amazon hired Pat Beyer to be their chief economist, when Microsoft hired Susan Athey to be their chief economist, these Silicon Valley companies, what did they do with their all their online platforms and their ads and their searches and their retail? They used algorithms, artificial intelligence, and data 15 years ago, 20 years ago to optimize the revenue that they can earn. All I'm asking is whether or not our governments are up to, is it reasonable to say technologically, can you guys do things Silicon Valley's been doing for 15, 20 years to try to optimize outcomes for consumers? I don't think that's something that we shouldn't be asking. And we know technologically it can happen. I don't know whether or not, politics and things get involved. Maybe that's above my pay grade as an economist, but I look at the fundamentals with data, artificial intelligence, and market design, and I think to myself, why isn't we can't start creating robotic shoppers, robotic agents, if you will, that do the work for us, enable competition, and relieve us of all of this effort and complexity that yields things like high prices and maybe potentially regressive prices over the income distribution.
Meanwhile, and just a final question, David, what is your key message for people trying now to navigate this complicated market before this redesign, this market redesign that you're advocating? What should governments focus on to make it fairer?
I mean, the governments are doing what many governments do when we're trying to empower consumers with data, and that is they make price comparison tools and they put the data out there. I'm not so sure that, governments are going to be able to do much, much beyond that. I think one thing would be to, you could imagine allowing people to sign up for an automated service that every month or maybe every 6 months sends you a report. It automatically sends it to you, so you don't have to spend the effort to do it. And it says, and uh, the companies have just updated their prices. Here's your current deals. Maybe you should switch. So we could do that. We could sign you up to, let's call it a personalized shopping newsletter. Another way to think of it is, I mean, I think an analogy, it's like signing up. You'd be like, there's a market for fitness coaches, and you go to the gym, and they keep you on check, and they're the ones calling you to come out to the gym and keep fit. It's a little like that. You could have an automated algorithmic calculator that could also check in on you every 6 months or 4 months or whatever frequency to just keep you abreast of where your best deals are. That would be one thing. So
And in fact, there is a startup. I did interview the founder just fairly recently. There is a startup, which I will just give a little plug to,
sure.
Automised Energy. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. So it's a subscription model. So each month you will be given that, as you say, the newsletter or the update on what the best plan is for you. It's customized
Yep.
because they're getting access to your energy data through a piece of legislation called the Consumer Data Right,
Yes.
which has only become available for energy users fairly recently. And so through that, you assign them to get access from your retailer to all this data, and then they can determine as you go along what the best plan for you is going to be. So that's the model you're thinking?
This is an intermediate step to redesigning the market, but that's exactly what I would have in mind. It's basically that we just have to accept from the evidence from 15 years of studying this stuff that for large swaths of people, the platforms and the data that we provide for comparison don't drive a lot of pull. And so maybe we need to have a bit of push in terms of solves what we call a commitment problem. So what I mean by that is, let's talk about going to the gym again, and then I'll draw it to electricity. If it's up to me to go to the gym and it's only on me, every day I'll show up and say I'll go tomorrow. Every day I'll show up, I'll go tomorrow. I'm not committed, and there's nothing compelling me because I'm the one in control. One reason why people go to gym with friends is because, and if it's me and you, and I'm like, well, she's going, I need to go. And so you would solve the commitment problem for me, and I'd be solving it for you, and we keep going to the gym together. It's the analogy here is kind of connect, like if we're connecting it back to electricity, is there's a sense in which signing up for the newsletter helps me deal with my commitment problem of not paying attention, looking, or switching. It will automatically send something to me to allow me to make better decisions. And this is what we're learning in many studies in economics as we get better and better data, and we do more and more behavioral trials. If I was to go further with the newsletter or the subscription service says, here's your best deal. An even better service would be underneath that deal, and this isn't that far off from what I just described. There's a button that says, take it, and all you have to do is touch the button, you're automatically on it. I don't think that's going to be in place yet, but that's where we need to drive. Because if you don't make this as easy as Uber, you're not going to get the uptake to move the market.
Yes. Watch this space. David Byrne, thank you so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
And Professor David Byrne is the Ritchie Chair of Economic Research at the University of Melbourne and also a member of the Australian Competition Tribunal. Now, if you missed my interview with the founder of Automised Energy, the automated, customised subscription service that David and I mentioned, check it out on the Switched On back catalogue. It was released on May 6 and titled Switching Electricity Plans Sucks, and the startup making it easier. That's all from Switched On today. I'm Anne Delaney. Don't forget to like, share and comment. I'll see you next time.